I think this is going to be the most gendered election. And I think there's an acceptance, almost, in the Trump campaign that they're going to do very well among men and let's just maximise the men vote. And in the Harris campaign, there is a recognition that they're going to do very well among women and let's maximise the women's vote. You're going to see really huge disparities between who men vote for and who women vote for.
Jon Sopel, welcome to PoliticsJOE.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you. You're the former BBC North America editor, you're current news agent, and you're the author of this new book, Strangeland, which explores your relationship with the UK on your return back from America. I'm sure that our audience knows exactly who you are. There's a big crossover. We can see on the back end that if you watch PoliticsJOE, you probably watch the news agents. But how would you introduce yourself?
Really nice bloke. does that work as an introduction?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can have it on a name strap.
Yeah, I mean, kind of been a journalist my whole life. I spent 8 years as the BBC's North America editor during the, end of Obama, Trump years, first bit of Biden. Pretty tumultuous time in America, what with, 2 impeachments, an attempted insurrection, all the rest of it that flowed from it on January the 6th. And then came back and having spent my whole life at the BBC, left to launch the News Agents podcast with Emily Maitlis and Lewis Goodall, which we've been doing for the last 2 and a bit years, and it seems to have gone okay.
I think selling out Royal Albert Hall is pretty okay.
Yeah. I mean, it feels unreal, actually, that bit of it, because, you go... of course, when I was endlessly on the TV outside the White House when I was in the US. And so... but that's the sort of job. You don't think of journalists doing things like the Royal Albert Hall. No. That seems to me rather extraordinary and takes some getting used to. And frankly, scares the living daylights out of me. Well, I feel physically sick when people say, "Oh, you sold out the Royal Albert Hall," because I'm thinking, "Oh my God, we're going to have to go and do this."
You're going to have to do something.
And not fall over and hopefully make sense. And I've written Strangeland because I thought I came back from America after 8 years, and I thought, my God, there's so much about this country that feels slightly weird. And that's not to say that countries don't change. Of course they change. But I spent 4 years living in Paris when I was the Paris correspondent 20-odd years ago. And you come back and Britain felt much the same. Tony Blair was still the Prime Minister. We'd had an Iraq war, which had been very unpopular, but Blair then goes on to win the 2005 general election. I mean, the first election I voted in when I was a student was in 1979, and Thatcher becomes the Prime Minister. Jim Callaghan, the Labour Prime Minister, is booted out after the winter of discontent. And for the next 3 decades, 28 years, we had Thatcher, we had John Major, and we had Tony Blair. 3 prime ministers, 28 years. I came back to the UK in 2022. We had 3 prime ministers in 1 year. And if you don't ask the question, what the hell has just happened in our country, then that shows a distinct lack of journalistic curiosity. And so I suppose that, combined with what I saw in America on January the 6th, when there was an attempt to overthrow a free and fair election, which came far closer, I think, than people recognise, then I think that was kind of made me think, crikey, how safe are our own democratic institutions? And that's the crucible of the book.
Those are things that we're going to come to later in the interview. As well as the churn of prime ministers that we've had recent years, we've obviously had a churn of chancellors. And you spoke to the Chancellor yesterday. We finally saw under the hood of what this Labour government is hoping to achieve. What is it that you think is the politics at the heart of this Labour government now? What did the Chancellor reveal to us yesterday?
So it was interesting. I mean, I suppose what I came away thinking, I thought she was very self-confident, very clear-minded. But anyone who thought that this would be a Labour government like the Blair Labour government, sort of new Labour, business-friendly, in its relationship with the trade unions, don't ask for favours, ask for fairness, I thought this was quite an old Labour manifesto, old Labour approach to the economy. Big increases in public expenditure on the health service, on education, massive tax increases to fund that. And black hole that was inherited from the Conservatives, and people can debate the extent to which that was. But it wasn't New Labour. It wasn't New Labour. There seemed to be a relish in kind of putting costs on businesses, people who are quite well-to-do. They're going to take the burden of that, so redistributive in that sense. Whereas Blair, I think, would have been much more cautious about a budget of that nature. And when I say old Labour, I don't mean old Labour Jeremy Corbyn. I think old Labour in the sense that there used to be a strong streak in the Labour Party 30 or 40 years ago. There was a classic battle, if you like, in the Labour tribes between the right and the left of the Labour Party. And the right had their trade union leaders and their representatives in Parliament who would fight the good fight on behalf of that wing of the party. And then there was the left of the Labour Party. This is the old-fashioned right of the Labour Party. It's statist, big believers in welfarism, big believers in, although the language is about business is the engine of growth, you've loaded an awful lot of the cost. Business is going to bear the burden of this, which arguably is going to damage growth.
You as well, you can't really see anyone in this government saying they're comfortable with people getting filthy rich, as is the New Labour line.
That's so funny you said that. One of the questions I mulled over asking and didn't ask Rachel Reeves was exactly that. Are you supremely relaxed about people getting filthy rich as long as they pay their taxes? Because I suspect, I don't know, I just thought it would be, you've got a very time-limited thing for an interview and you're conscious that the clock is ticking and you don't want to waste questions, because my guess is that she would say, yeah, I am, because I don't know, if she hadn't said, yes, I am, that would have been fascinating, because that would have been a sort of, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the point is well made that I don't think that is, that famous phrase of Peter Mandelson about being supremely relaxed about people being filthy rich as long as they pay their taxes. That's not the mindset of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. It's kind of much more class conscious.
It's class warfare.
I wouldn't go as far as to say class warfare.
Or staking their line in the sand, certainly, with their going after VAT on private schools.
It's very class conscious. It's very class conscious, I think, as a government. And that is a real counterpoint, because I think that even though Gordon Brown was the Chancellor and would not, he was very New Labour in terms of getting Labour elected. But he and Blair had big differences as time went on. It feels like a very different place. And also, Blair kind of trumpeted all the business people that he had around him who played big roles in government. And, you look around the cabinet table, everyone seems to have been as sort of, come up through the classic ranks of the Labour Party. And, kind of having got involved at university, gone to work for a SPAD or been a special advisor, gone to work at a think tank, then, et cetera, et cetera. And they've gone that route. And so it's a very different feel. I think it's a very different feel from Blair's government. And Blair was obviously public school educated and the rest of it. And this is much less so.
You mentioned business people there. Obviously, it's a big week for one businessman in particular. I'm not sure.
Hang on. How long have you got? American? Did he build buildings?
Buildings, loves buildings.
Golf courses?
Yep.
I think I'm there. I'm with you.
I wasn't sure that segue was going to work. But I think
we got there.
That was some heavy lifting on your side. In 2016, when Trump became the Republican nominee, you told the Today programme, of course, he will win. What made you so sure?
Oh, well, I didn't quite say, of course, he will win. What I said was there was a kind of incredulity on the Today programme when I spoke to the presenter. But he can't win, can he? Surely he can't win. And the same day I was doing this two-way on the Today programme with Sarah Montague, who was then presenting it, was the day that Leicester City had just clinched the Premier League title. Leicester City, the Premier League title. Are you kidding me? That was that was a kind of 1,000 to 1 shot that Leicester City, a very unfancied team from the Midlands, would walk away with the Premier League title, and they had just done that. Donald Trump was in a 2-horse race. Of course he could win. And what I had seen in the lead up to the 2016 election was just this enthusiasm gap that was so striking that at Trump rallies, tens of thousands of people would turn up. They'd all be in fancy dress costume of Trump hats, and this is before everyone was wearing a MAGA hat. But they would make their own, and it was a kind of fiesta atmosphere. And Hillary Clinton's were slightly drab, slightly dour, and everyone was kind of very right on and woke, and it felt like just there was this chasm between the two. And I thought that, we can argue, was there misogyny in the US electorate? Yeah, probably a bit. Was Hillary Clinton upended by James Comey, the FBI director, reopening an investigation into her private email server? Yeah. But she was also a lousy candidate in terms of the way she prosecuted the campaign, i.e. not going to Michigan or Wisconsin, thinking that they were absolutely a firm lock Democrat territory. Trump won them. That was woeful and catastrophic. But also her messaging. Trump had really clear messaging. I want to build a wall. I want to bring back manufacturing jobs. I want to, keep Muslims out. I mean, you might not like it, but the messaging was clear, and it struck a chord with the American people, and Trump was a better candidate in 2016.
I think it's quite difficult for Brits to understand the appeal of Donald Trump to his base, because if you visit the US, you're probably going to California, New York, Florida, Orlando, I guess. I was studying abroad in North Carolina in 2016, and I remember we were driving to the beach studying in Chapel Hill, and we were driving through these towns, and I was like, "Oh, I get it. Oh, this is the most devastated, derelict place I've ever been to in my life. There's a Trump sign on every garden because the only business in the town seems to be the petrol station, and the windows are broken." I think people didn't really understand the desperation that a lot of people had for change, and what, even if it was simple, even if it was misguided, Donald Trump seemed to be offering a solution to these things.
So, it was a simplistic solution. It was a populist solution, and the book talks about the dangers of populism, because what happens is you offer a simple solution to a complex problem. You become the government. Oh, shit, life's more complicated than that. God, who knew it would be difficult?
To build a wall.
Yeah. And then you get, so Mexico's going to pay for building the wall, for example. That was the chant. What are we going to do? Build a wall. Who's going to pay for it? Mexico. Well, Mexico haven't.
No.
They were never going to.
No.
And so you get people thinking, oh, well, you've kind of let me down a bit here. And so, and that's the way further disillusionment sets into politics. And I'm kind of the book is written from a position of kind of love of liberal democracy, which is, although it's bloody imperfect, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I quite like free speech. I quite like the rule of law. I quite like free and fair elections, etc. And what happened in 2016 was that, part of it was that people were just fed up with politics and politicians and loved the idea of an outsider who was big, who was argumentative, who was politically incorrect, who would say the unsayable. And they latched onto that. And he had celebrity, he had glamour, he didn't pay his taxes, he'd been married 3 times, he had 5 children from 3 marriages. Just consider for a moment if the narrative had been Barack Obama having had 3 marriages and 5 children from that marriage, black man, 3 wives, 5 children. It would have been very different compared to what it was for Donald Trump, where it was something to be venerated. And he caught a mood. And I think what had happened in America, as had happened here, and arguably we went through just as big a jump in 2016 by voting for Brexit, was that people came to the view that conventional politics had let them down, that they had seen the 2008 financial crash. They had understood that there was a recession and that some people had lost their homes. Two things happened which made it unique. One was there have been recessions before, but the jobs have come back and people have gone back into employment, and the steel plant that was shuttered reopens, the factory that was mothballed has the mothballs taken out, and suddenly you've got the whir of machinery moving again. That didn't happen after 2008. A lot of the jobs just went abroad. This was the peak of globalization. So the jobs were going to the Philippines, were going to Vietnam, were going to wherever. You know, whenever we look inside our clothes and say made in the Philippines, made in Vietnam, made in somewhere else, those were clothes that might have been once upon a time made in Britain or made in America. Those jobs went. They never came back. But the other thing about 2008, which was so toxic and I think had such a scarring effect, that if you were a bank, you were too big to fail. And if you were just a small business guy on Main Street, you're too small to bail. And they didn't help people. People's homes were repossessed in their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. I mean, you know, I went to whole streets in Las Vegas, where there were bus tours of streets that were just completely emptied because the place had been repossessed. It was the same in Detroit, where they thought at one stage the art gallery was going to have to sell off the paintings to pay the policemen and firefighters because they'd run out of money. And that is how bad things had got. And these people are seeing their lives upended, whereas on Wall Street, they're all fine. And I think that really had a rotten sense, felt like the politicians had been complicit with the big banks, and I think people felt really angry.
And then fast forward to 2024, you saw that anger, I think, at the Madison Square Garden rally.
Yeah.
Whereas that was an angry crowd, and Trump was ranting and railing about the enemy within, which is quite, well, it's not unusual for him to use worrying language, but promoting that kind of language is pretty disturbing. And then you also had the comedian Tony Hinchcliffe making his comments about Puerto Rico. I think this whole 11-minute set is just pretty appalling in terms to most people. I think it's interesting. What people are talking about after that rally is how atrocious what Tony Hinchcliffe said about Puerto Rico was. That seems to be the coverage. But do you think that was a misstep by the Trump campaign to have Tony Hinchcliffe there and making those remarks?
Yeah, I think it was. I think that, I mean, there will be two things that Trump was really, really pissed off about in relation to what happened at Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden was all about him.
Yep.
It was a pure ego thing. There was no need for him to hold a rally in Madison Square Garden. New York isn't in play. New York is going to vote Democrat on November the 5th unless something tumultuous is happening in America that no pollster has picked up on. It was a vanity project. Donald Trump wanted to be Donald Trump. I've sold out Madison Square Garden. And he had. So he will be pissed off. One, that it's brought all this adverse publicity. But two, and you cannot over-exaggerate this, he'll be pissed off that the limelight was stolen from him.
By someone no one's heard of.
That no one's ever heard of, saying crap stuff and stuff, you know, and there were other people on stage as well who said outrageous things, you know, Hillary Clinton, son of a bitch, and la 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 la, and all fucking weirdos in the Democratic Party. I mean, you know, it was... there are those things that we get wrong in the media quite often, where we say, "Oh God, have you heard what he's just said?" And everyone's got an attack of the vapors, and they've got smelling salts under their nose. And actually, the controversy works to Donald Trump's advantage because it resonates with his people, his base, and the more the media gets in high dudgeon about it, the more people think, "Oh, sod off! I like him, and he's my guy." And that is really powerful influence in American politics. But equally, I think that you can go too far. There is such a thing as bad publicity. I think Madison Square Garden was bad publicity. But the rescue operation came in the shape of Joe Biden when he kind of talked about Trump supporters being an island of garbage and the White House having to clear up a mess. I honestly think that Kamala Harris at that point probably wanted to, get the keys to the attic room in the White House, lock Joe Biden in it and say, you're not coming out without any electronic devices until after November the 5th.
Like some sort of Miss Havisham or something.
Yeah, exactly. No, completely. I mean, it was ghastly and it was stupid. And it was, Kamala Harris would be right to feel angry about it because I think it was a bad misstep by Trump.
I'm curious about that because we talked about Tony Hinchcliffe appealing to Trump's base, perhaps reminding his base of Trump kind of winking at them saying, don't worry, I'm still your guy. I think these things about Puerto Rico. And I wonder if Joe Biden might have had the same effect on the Democratic base of saying, you think that these people are appalling, you think these arguments are racist, you think Trump's a threat to democracy, don't worry, so do I.
If that's what Biden thought, the way he said it was crass. Mm-hmm. We saw what happened, spool back to the 2016 campaign and Hillary Clinton's comments. And it was at a private fundraiser, but the recording got out about the basket of deplorables that was the Trump base. And what happens in these things is that the Trump base love to feel that Trump is persecuted, and by dint, they are persecuted too, that everyone's against them. And so in 2016, it was everyone started wearing a T-shirt saying, I'm a deplorable, which was saying, another way of saying, I'm backing Trump. And I knew as soon as I heard those Biden quotes, the Trump campaign will be all over it. And Trump yesterday is in a dumper truck and wearing a yellow high-vis jacket. So where I think that the miscalculation is, the Trump base is solid.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's not as if in MAGA-land, someone's going to say, oh, the comment about Puerto Ricans, I'm going over to vote for Kamala Harris now. They're there.
Yeah.
What Trump needs to do is to build out from there. I mean, you look at what happened in Pennsylvania, just to go a tiny bit sort of micro for a minute, in the primaries. Mm-hmm. Nikki Haley, who was the UN ambassador, who was Trump's UN ambassador and former governor of South Carolina, she was running as a mainstream Republican against Trump during the primary process, picks up a huge number of votes that haven't automatically gone over to Trump. They are mainstream Republicans who really hold their nose at Donald Trump. Trump should be kind of widen his appeal. The base is solid. Mm-hmm. This confirms to people, in my judgment, that Trump is who he is, but how is he broadening out the support to bring in that very small sliver of America that is undecided? I don't think they're undecided between, am I going to vote for Harris or am I going to vote for Trump? It's, am I going to vote at all? Mm-hmm. Trump needs to broaden the base, and instead of which what he does, and what Madison Square Garden did, was just appeal to the base.
In 2020, Joe Biden ran on a campaign. He was arguing this is a campaign to save American democracy.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is doing the same thing. Do you think that's an effective line still?
I don't know. I think she wanted to run a different campaign. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was at the convention in Chicago in August, and it was all about feel good, and the way she portrayed Trump was, he's just a comedian. He's not a serious person, was the phrase she used. And she didn't want to go dark. She didn't want to go dark. This is a threat to democracy. This is undermining our way of life, because I think she thought that would be counterproductive. And she just wanted to say, America, there is hope. I represent hope. He represents something completely different. And I think she's been, because she got early momentum and then stalled. I think the Democrats, as a lot of politicians often are, find themselves in the position of, shit, that hasn't worked. I'm going to throw something else at the wall and see if it sticks. And I think that she's in the process. The Democrats are trying. They want to get the Democrat base out. She's got to worry about young black men who seem to be going over to Trump and young Latino men who are kind of the bro vote that Trump is going for, and the sort of hyper-masculinity vote. So she's got to get men back on board. She wants to solidify a position among women where she enjoys a big gender advantage. She wants to try to get moderate Republicans who kind of hold their nose at Donald Trump into her column on November the 5th. And so I think you try everything. And it's not just that there is one strategy. There are multiple strategies. Because I think that political analysis that says, right, this is our approach to winning an election, is to ignore the fact that actually it's not the electorate is this homogenous whole. There are little micro groups within it, that stratification of, whether it's kind of ethnically diverse, women, young people, whatever. You have different tactics, you have different messaging for different people. And that's what you can do. That's what where Obama revolutionized campaigning was micro messaging. And I'm sure that Kamala Harris is doing some of that.
You touched on each campaign's appeal to men there, and I think, or attempting to appeal to men, and I think that's perhaps best exemplified by their two VP picks, who are two very different men. As in JD Vance, I think, appeals to you, the bro vote, the people who listen to Rogan, who don't mind what he says about crazy cat ladies. And I think Tim Walz appeals to a softer man, one who worries about their daughter's future, but also has kind of a masculine energy to him because he was a high school football coach. He won the state championship. He likes going hunting. What do you think that says about the campaign's attempts to appeal to men?
I think that what you try to do normally, I mean, there are exceptions in history, but on the ticket, who's going to be the presidential candidate, who's going to be the VP, is you want people who complement each other, not identical. If you look at the classic ticket of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson in 1960, that was a ticket that you have this East Coast, highly educated, well-to-do Roman Catholic, which was a kind of novelty in America that there would be. But then he's got a weakness of the Deep South, which was still very democratic at that stage. Who can I get on? Well, right, the quintessential Texan, Lyndon B. Johnson. And so you get a balanced ticket. I think that if Trump has made a mistake, and look, it may be a total victory, is that Trump has got a mini-me in JD Vance, because I think that in terms of their politics, they're similar. I think that JD Vance is a much more persuasive and intellectually coherent advocate of Trumpism.
Yep.
There's a you can see that he rationalizes it very well. He's a very good debater. He's very confident, but there is an awful lot of stuff that he has said, which is even more Trumpian than Trump, about cat ladies, all the rest of it, childless cat ladies, which was very offensive. With Tim Walz as a pick, I think it was a smart pick. She the California prosecutor, very liberal, kind of interesting racial background, and Tim Walz is almost literally middle America.
He's just a bloke.
Yeah, he's just a bloke who wears ill-fitting cargo pants, trainers, plaid shirts, and a camouflage hat. I mean, he just looks like having travelled extensively in America, he looks like every American you'll see on a commuter flight from somewhere to somewhere else.
Yep.
And I think that he's a faintly reassuring figure in that way, and so I think he works very well for Harris. I think this is going to be the most gendered election that you've seen. There was some debate about whether Kamala Harris would go on Joe Rogan, and she hasn't. And I think there's an acceptance almost in the Trump campaign that they're going to do very well among men, and let's just maximize the male vote. And in the Harris campaign, there is a recognition that they're going to do very well among women, and let's maximize the women's vote. And I honestly think that you're going to see really huge disparities between who men vote for and who women vote for. next week. I mean, that's certainly what all the evidence is suggesting at the moment. And that's because of the overturning, the twin factors of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the seminal sort of abortion law that gave women a right to choose and had control over their reproductive rights, and that being overturned by, a pretty conservative Supreme Court. And on the other side of it, the sort of Joe Rogan, beer chugging, towel snapping, gymnasium locker bro vote, who feel that it's all gone a bit soft and feminine in America. And, trans issues and gay marriage play into all of that. I mean, Donald Trump has taken to calling Anderson Cooper, who is the most famous CNN anchor and who is openly gay, he calls him now Alison Cooper.
Oofed.
At rallies. I mean, he's calling him Alison Cooper. Oh, I mean, I'm sorry, I meant Anderson Cooper.
Jesus.
And you just think, that is a strategy that is not accidental. That is, I am going for the masculine male vote. It's a way of saying I am not a woke, liberal, gay marriage supporting, trans rights activist. I am a red-blooded American. And look, the numbers are working for him. The only risk is that there are more women in America than there are men, and also women go to vote in higher numbers than men. And, if that bears out, then, that might create one or two surprises on election day.
You mentioned Trump had gone on Rogan, and Kamala Harris did call her daddy, which is like the biggest female-led podcast, certainly in America, maybe the world. You're now a fully signed up member of the new media, having been in the old legacy media.
Legacy. I was legacy, but I'm now new.
Now new. That's welcome in. What do you make of the candidates' embrace of these podcasts as compared to doing a sit-down interview on NBC, MSNBC, things like that? Because American journalists are up in arms about it, I would say.
Well, get over it. If they had, look, I think that, I don't want to talk about what you're doing, what I'm doing, what we're doing. You've got to engage an audience in different ways. And it's no use saying, oh, well, there's something wrong with young people. They don't seem to be interested in news. No, they're just not interested in the way you're presenting it.
Yeah.
Okay? So don't be up yourself. They don't want to watch a linear television news bulletin where we've got 2.5 minutes on this and 2.5 minutes on that and 2.5 minutes on something else. And after half an hour, we go to the weather forecast.
Yep.
I think that's done. People want a conversation that is in a different format where you get to know a bit about the people who are doing it. They've hopefully got some interesting things to say and interesting analysis. They're going to ask interesting questions. The conversation is mildly interesting. And then, the fact that, we started at this interview talking about how I'd been at the Treasury yesterday.
Yep.
I think there were a lot of conventional media who thought, what? Hang on. The news agents have got one of the first interviews with the Chancellor after she's just sat down. What's going on there? Well, I don't think it's because Rachel Reeves loves us, although she probably does. I mean, she's only human, for God's sake.
She's got the role Albert Hall.
I mean, yeah, exactly. It's because she thinks there's an audience there that she wants to reach. And there is a different way of talking about politics, hopefully on a podcast like we're doing now, which is more discursive, where you've got time to expand a point, and you're not thinking, I've got to make a 20-second soundbite.
Yeah, and I think this is just an open invitation to the Labour front bench to come on PoliticsJOE whenever you want. John's having a lovely time.
I'm having a lovely time. The time of my life.
At the time of your life. Excellent. That's going on all of our promo. Just that clip. We touched on Tim Walz being a bloke there, and in your book you talk about sort of that's the appeal of Trump and Farage, and it probably extends to Vance and Walz as well. Why are we so obsessed with our politicians being normal?
I suppose it's relatability. I suppose it's also a bit about authenticity. So when I was out in the States and Trump was president, I was the North America editor, and you'd see a tweet from Hillary Clinton and you saw a tweet from Donald Trump. Donald Trump's would be misspelt block capitals, appalling punctuation, comedic in many ways. But you absolutely bloody well knew it was him who had written it. Whereas if I saw a tweet from, Theresa May when she was Prime Minister or Hillary Clinton, you just thought, okay, that's been written by one of the social media team. Mm-hmm. There was no degree of personal connection, and I think that is sort of something that, people expect to get to know you better now. And I think new media is part and parcel of that, it's not just enough for me to be Jon Sopel, BBC News, Washington. If you're going to ask people to spend time with you, then you've got to offer them something else. And I think that for politicians, obviously the greatest politicians are the one who are totally inauthentic, but can fake authenticity. But every now and then politicians come along and you think, I wouldn't mind having a beer with Nigel Farage, or, I think people probably felt the same about Prescott. When he was Labour deputy leader, he just seemed like he had blood running through his veins. He seemed like a real person. And I think there is a premium on that in politics.
Mm. And there's also where you see politicians trying to lean into it. I think whenever you hear, I remember, it might have actually been on your podcast, John. I heard an interview with Angela Rayner, and she was asked about her relationship with Starmer, and the first thing she said was, well, he supports a rubbish football team. And I was trying to have an example of banter. I don't think it came up particularly well. It seemed sort of forced, but there's this not desperation or inclination to be perceived as normal, and it's such they place such a premium on it, when being an elected politician is such an anomaly for anyone's life. Do you necessarily want them to be a normal person?
Well, I think Angela Rayner is a fascinating case, because I've never seen such a concerted effort by sort of sections of the right-wing press to bring her down. The whole to-do about her council house sale, and I couldn't quite work out what the whole story was about. And was she living there or wasn't she? There was a story in the Times the other day about her having bought her boyfriend a really expensive suit from a Savile Row tailor. And I thought, hang on, sorry, I'm missing something here. Labour deputy leader, deputy prime minister, buys her boyfriend a suit. What's the story?
Yeah.
Oh, what? Oh, the story is that she's bought it from a really expensive shop which has got a royal patent, because she's working class and
she can't have that.
She can't have that, and she shouldn't. What? She went to the opera? Oh my God!
A woman with that accent.
A woman with that accent. And I thought, oh my God, you are. The right wing papers are playing into her hands. This is magic for her, because I think it shows the journalists writing this crap to be self-obsessed, lacking total self-awareness of how this comes over. And editorials who want to run this stuff are just thinking people are cheering Angela Rayner because she doesn't conform to what they want her to be, which is this, idiot working class lassie. She's far more sophisticated, clever than that. And I just think you're making fools of yourself by trying to portray her in that way. And I think that Angela Rayner comes across as somebody who's got a degree of authenticity and you know who they are. That's why Boris Johnson was so popular. People felt they knew who he was. There was a sort of degree of kind of likability. And, although Angela Rayner and Boris Johnson could not come from more different backgrounds, where they strike a chord with the public is because there is a relatability to them.
I find it interesting the breathlessness with which the right-wing press are writing about this Labour government, particularly with the recent scandal, in quotation marks, about Labour members going out to campaign for Harris. It seems there is... they're just looking... There seems to be a desperation to find mud that sticks on this government.
I think that we have always had a press that is much more political. I mean, in America, you've got electronic media that is much more, political. You've got Fox News, which is very much to the right, and then you've got One American News Network, which is even further to the right, and Newsmax even further. And then on the other side, you've got CNN, which has become a sort of centre-left, and MSNBC, which is again on the left, would be seen, by the righties as being very much to the left. In Britain, we've always had a media that is, is it a conservative supporting newspaper? And you could go down the list and say, yes. The Times, well, it hedges its bets a bit. I think as the circulation has declined precipitously, and they are trying to find a business model that works, they're trying to provide clickbait. I mean, every day I get Telegraph news alerts. I bet if I looked at my phone now, there'd be a Telegraph news alert saying, is this the end of the world after Rachel Reeves' budget? It will be...
New Stalin, Rachel Reeves.
The apocalypse has arrived. Thank you, Rachel.
Rachel Thieves, actually.
Yeah, Rachel Thieves, exactly. Good. Like line. I mean,
I will fully confess, I was at a landlord's convention yesterday, and the landlord said it to me. I might be using that in future. You'll actually quite like...
I won't credit it.
You'll like this line as well. No, feel free to have this as well. I said, what did you make of Starmer's assessment that landlords aren't working people? And he replied, well, he doesn't even know the difference between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
So you can have that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that is where the toxicity of the debate comes in, and what I rail about in the book, because I just think it's kind of, I mean, Lewis is in Florida this week. He's did these vox pops about, and then people were talking about Britain, thinking, there are Muslim no-go zones in this country, and we don't want to become like that. And, just the stuff that is patently untrue being passed off as fact and being taken in by large numbers of people. It depresses me that some of the newspapers seem to be abandoning. I don't mind them being right of centre or even far right, but report fairly. And it's just some of that seems to be going in the business of getting clicks. And that's where I think people like us, and I'm not saying this in any smug way at all, I think it's bloody desperate, have a job to do, which is to report fairly. We've been reporting pretty harshly on aspects of the Labour government because, it's fallen short of where it set itself out to be. And have been sharply critical. But we are in the job of holding power to account, people in power to account. And I think it doesn't matter whether it's a Labour government or a Conservative government or a Republican administration or a Democrat administration, the job is the same, which is to scrutinise, but fairly, toughly, not hysterically, and say what's going on.
Is that becoming more difficult in the current political climate where probably before Boris Johnson, but Boris Johnson exemplifies someone who's not willing to engage in fair, honest terms? You had just this week Robert Jenrick leaning into conspiracy theories, I would say, suggesting there was a cover-up regarding the attacks in Southport. Is it incredibly difficult? Because what you're saying is, what you're describing is the noble pursuit of journalism as truth. But if your opponents, the people playing the game with you, aren't playing by those rules, because say you report on a Tommy Robinson rally and you say someone said X, Y, and Z, the attacks on you, the journalist, say that didn't happen, and that's going out to millions of people, and that is automatically believed. I think have the rules changed, and how do you think you combat that?
Well, it's a great question. I think that, the charge of the Light Brigade, semaine efficace mais ce n'est pas la guerre, was this kind of idea of this old-fashioned way of, the cavalry would go charging in, and they're all mowed down by the machine guns that are waiting to pick them off. The charge of the Light Brigade, they were playing by a different set of rules than the people who were operating the guns. And I feel that there's something similar has happened in journalism, whereby the politicians have decided, you know what? We've always wanted to fashion the truth to whatever shape it suited us to, but the kernel of truth would be there. And now you've discovered with social media, you don't even need to have a kernel of truth. You can tell lies. You can tell untruths. Donald Trump did it endlessly, from day one of his presidency. Boris Johnson ultimately brought down by the lies catching up with him. But what you had was a media playing by the old-fashioned rules of, well, some people are claiming this and some people are claiming that. And I thought, when I was in America, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. We're not telling... Of course, anyone can say, you might think this, you might think it's raining outside, but I think it's dry. The job of the journalist is to go outside and say, well, is it raining or not? Oh, no, it's not. Well, I'm sorry, it's not on the one hand, on the other. And I think that during the Brexit debate, why I think there's, we were told that there'd be all this extra money for their health service per week. Untrue. We were told that we'd be able to carry on trading with the European Union, that we'd be able to stay inside the single market and enjoy all the benefits of that, but we just wouldn't have to have free movement. Not true. We were told that it'd be really easy to trade with Northern Ireland, that there was an oven-ready deal. Not true. And so did we call that out enough at the time? And that's my question. And, Emily spoke about this when she did the McTaggart TV lecture in Edinburgh, that the media hadn't caught up with the rules and the scrutiny. And I think that if you're, the BBC and you are funded by the licence payer, it's quite, and you know that Downing Street will be on the phone to either the BBC's head of news or the Director General at the drop of a hat. It's kind of, you go for the sort of slightly, well, let's just blur it a little bit and say, well, they're claiming this and they're claiming that. And I don't think that tells the audience enough about what's going on. And I think there are times when you need to say, that's not true, or that doesn't work, or that has not been explained properly.
In your book, you describe on January the 6th, wondering if the same thing could happen in Britain. Now you've been back in Britain for a few years. What's your assessment of that?
I think Britain, look, I would love to send a video to the Trump campaign of Rishi Sunak's magnificent concession speech after losing the election to Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer's kind of, modest and humble acceptance of the responsibility of being the nation's prime minister. And I thought that spoke really, really well to Britain. But we now have a hard right anti-immigrant grouping in Parliament, which, it's growing and is a powerful force, and it got 4 million votes. And if there was proportional representation, would have a much bigger say. Arguably, there is a far left grouping now around Corbyn and those independent MPs who, were very critical of Israel and pro-Gaza. And so that is new in British politics. We haven't had those sort of groupings before. Now, I'm not saying that the democracy is in danger, but I think that anyone who thinks that we can just take our institutions for granted and that we'll always live, we flirted with populism. We flirted with, Boris Johnson was found to have unlawfully prorogued Parliament. The irony of which is you can't be lost on you that, his great argument for Brexit was that Parliament should be sovereign. We shouldn't be taking rules from Brussels. Our Parliament is the sovereign place. And yet he tried to shortcut Parliament out of everything. And, I just think that there are risks there that shouldn't be ignored, and that there is a battle against the glib, easy solutions of the left and of the right that just lead to more and more extremism in our politics. And there has never been so little support for the two main parties in more than a century as a result of what happened on July the 4th in our general election.
I would maybe slightly push back on your assessment of the far left and the far right as threats in this country, in that there hasn't been a far left mob attempting to burn down mosques. There's 15,000 people in Parliament Square last Saturday in support of Tommy Robinson, who wasn't even there. I think there's a much more visible far right presence in this country than there is far left. And even the assessment of the independent group of MPs, Jeremy Corbyn's of the left, I think the other four are still untested.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that there are dangers. And I think that, some of the, maybe people will be horrified by my views on this, but look, do I think the far right is a threat? And I think that, I kind of thought, interestingly, my book stops just after Keir Starmer is made Prime Minister. And I'm going to have to write an additional chapter for the paperback. And I thought my starting point for the chapter on the paperback, spoiler alert, would be the riots. Because I think if you're Reform, and certainly if you're the kind of flotsam and jetsam of the English Defence League, you would say that is the real face of Britain. We're furious about illegal immigration. We're furious about this. I think, and I argue in the book, that illegal immigration absolutely has to be tackled, and there has to be a controlled migration system, and there needs to be a grown-up conversation about the benefits as well that migration brings. But was the true face of Britain those ugly bastards who were trying to burn down a hotel where asylum seekers are in Rotherham? Or was the true face of Britain the people who were out with their brooms and their brushes the next day, clearing up, rebuilding the wall of the mosque, reglazing the windows, and all the rest of it? I think there's a core of decency that runs through the British people. I think there is an intolerance that's not the same as a democratic threat, but there is an intolerance of the left of views that are not the people who hold them. And you see it in the trans debate. You see it in the debate on climate change, that some people think they have the right to glue themselves to the M25 motorway. And I think that you are alienating people by that sort of action. And I just think it's very, very counterproductive to do that. But I think it encourages that people moving to extremes rather than making reasonable argument. And the intolerance around certain debates on university campuses now, where people get cancelled or deplatformed or whatever it happens to be. I mean, I hate the phrase cancelled, but people know what it means. We've got to be able to listen to other people's viewpoints than our own. And you can't just say, well, because you've said this, you're not coming to our college or university. I think that is regressive.
My last question for you, gun to your head, who wins the US election?
I'm going to pull the trigger. Honestly, so the poll, if you believe polls and you study polling evidence, and believe me, I've been reading polls about Wisconsin, Michigan, kind of Pennsylvania, North Carolina rather, and Georgia and all the rest of them, to the nth degree. You would have, if you believe the polls, you'd say, I don't know. My gut sometimes goes all over the place. Oh my God, Trump's going to win. It's going to be a landslide. It's going to be a blowout victory, which is what some of his people are talking about. I think it's marginally, I think the thing that is underpriced at the moment in the polling is that in 2016, everyone went, oh, we didn't realise there were all these Trump voters who were on their trailer parks, what you described at the beginning in North Carolina, on their trailer parks, polishing their guns, no teeth, no education, who were off the grid, who came back on the grid to vote for Trump. I wonder whether similarly this time round, the pollsters have overcompensated and have weighting Trump's poll votes, but are missing out on young people and women who are very, very motivated to vote this time round because of the change in abortion laws and all the rest of it. And on that basis, I still think it's possible marginally that Harris wins it. But I wouldn't be surprised by a Harris blowout, a Trump blowout, or a messy kind of in the middle contested election.
So you're hedging your bets there.
I think I said what I think is the underpriced bit, which is I think that maybe the Harris vote has been underpriced.
Jon Sopel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.